conversation. And then, probably at 5 after we'll start. But yeah, give everybody a chance to trickle in. Hello, everybody.
Hello.
Oh yeah. Hello. 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 Um, but yeah, Josh, if you have if you want to say like rutabaga, or say whatever word of like I'm done, or let there
Me.
be the good word and the like I'm done word, the dunzo word, or the
Oh,
like
let's have, yeah, what's a good word? Right. I like that. I like that. I like the code word. You like using a code word for keeping going.
rutabaga is we got to keep going.
Watermelon is stop it now.
Watermelon is I'm out. All right. Well, do you guys feel ready? Is that everybody good?
I'm ready.
We're recording. Okay, I just wanted to make sure. Yeah, they've been doing like they've been posting these. They're starting to post these on the YouTube. So I feel like I'm asking even more of you. So thank you for lending your dulcet tones, but also your beautiful, beautiful faces.
I would have put on more makeup if I'd realized. I forgot.
It's perfect. You're golden. You're golden.
Yeah, you look good.
All right, guys, here we go. When we think about the fear from the unconscious mind, there are several facets to our phobias that may surprise the common thinker. Consider the fear of unknown animal heights, the fear of sunny dispositions, or the fear of the anthropophagic crisis, or even the fear of those young girls sunning themselves on the beach. Oh, there are so many phobias to explore. One might say that we are purveyors of these fears, yeah? Or one might even say that we are fearmongers. And who is at the vanguard of the cutting edge of these explorations? It is none other than Ellen Datlow herself. And I am your host, Clay McLeod Chapman, and welcome to Fearmongers, everybody. Oh my Goddy, lordy, do we have a jam-packed episode tonight, because we are celebrating none other than Fears, Tales of Psychological Horrors itself, by Tachyon Press, edited by none other than the one, the only, the legend, Ellen Datlow. I said it. It's like a weird, like it's just like a psychological thing now. My fear is that I'm mispronouncing it. Oh my God. The worst was when I had to introduce Catriona Ward, and the whole time I was like, I just couldn't do it. And I just like kept saying it. Catriona. Like I drilled
And
that
what
thing.
did you end up doing?
I did like some weird histrionic kind of like Catriona, like just like something was just inverted, and it was terrible. And it to this day it haunts me. I bring it up at any chance I get. But guys, we have tonight contributing authors of Fears: Annie Neugebauer, Josh Malerman, Dale Bailey, and Hailey Piper. Hello, everybody. How are you doing?
Good.
Yeah?
Good.
Thank you so much for joining us tonight at Fearmongers. I feel like this is kind of a special opportunity. We've never kind of dove deep into a anthology before, and never had the opportunity to talk to an editor before. So this is kind of on a very special episode of Fearmongers. Ellen, I really want to start by asking this question to you and you only, because I feel as if I heard this at a convention recently, and it was you yourself who said it. So forgive me if I'm paraphrasing, but you said, I think you went on record as saying, nothing scares you. Nothing that you have read scares you. That there's been no story, no novel that like puts the fear in you. And I found this really fascinating. And correct me if I'm wrong or adjust, but is that true?
I think about that, and I think mostly yes. I mean, what I say when people ask me is what scares you, and I said real life, and I mean, which is actually why I like psychological horror. I mean, I like supernatural horror too, but the psychological horror is usually something that can actually happen to a person. But reading about it doesn't scare me. I mean, of course, it makes me uncomfortable. I mean, I'm affected by horror. I love horror. I love reading it. I'm not actually much of a film goer. Watch some horror movies, but not that many. Um, but no. I mean,
just find this
the one time
fascinating.
I might have brought it up, the one time, and it was only because of circumstances when I was reading Salem's Lot in a dark apartment. I mean, in an apartment at a friend's place. It was like large apartment, several rooms. And I was reading it and it was getting darker in the room. And I, put on the light, and I don't know where anyone else was. I mean, there must have been one or two other people in the apartment. And for, 5 seconds, I didn't want to go up to go to the bathroom, but like, but that was more, if I was reading it with all the lights on, it wouldn't have scared me. Yeah, so it's more, to me, that was more circumstantial than the actual reading of the material.
Have you ever been in a circumstance where you like bumped into Stephen King and just been like, "Hey, Steve, that Salem's Lot, it's the only book that really scares me." Like,
No,
has there
I've only met him maybe once, and yeah, I'm too intimidated. I don't think I ever talked to him. I mean, I'm sure I said hello, and I actually did edit a story of his for Omni years ago and talked to him about the cuts and the
blows my
edits.
mind.
But I never felt comfortable. I wouldn't feel comfortable being. He scares me in a way. I mean, he intimidates me.
But
So
I,
it's really weird. That's different though.
I
Intimidation versus being scared of someone.
but I think this needs to be kind of unpacked because I look at your career and the body of your work and the fact that you are probably responsible, single-handedly responsible for bringing fear to so many of us, to so many readers, that to not feel it yourself off of the writing or the reading, like I I don't know, like I find this really fascinating. Like you say you love horror, but
Mhm.
there's a different, like there's some kind of variation or kind of discrepancy between love reading it, love imbibing it,
It can
like
upset me. I mean, that's
yeah,
different. Okay. I mean, there's stories in here that really upset me. Um, but that's not the same as fear.
yeah,
It's makes me really uncomfortable. No, it is a different thing. I don't know. I don't think horror has to be a fearful experience. I
yeah.
mean, that's why, a lot of some readers hate my stuff, hate what I publish because they don't think it doesn't scare them. Well, it's like my intent is not what I buy. The intent is not to scare them, it's to make them discomforted, uncomfortable, dread. It was a feeling of dread,
Yeah.
maybe. But I mean, I don't buy things. I mean, I don't buy things for my anthologies or web zines or whatever. Say, oh, someone's gonna be really scared by this. I buy it because I like the story.
Yeah.
And the story hopefully if I'm buying for horror, I mean, I also edit science fiction and fantasy, but if I'm looking for really good horror, yes, I want a reaction from myself, but it's not going to be fear.
That is so fascinating. What is the criteria then? I mean, I know that
Of
you're
horror, of what I consider horror. Oh, that's a toughie. I mean,
yeah.
you don't want me to talk the whole time. I mean,
No, but this is, I mean, everybody who's listening to this now, I have to imagine is saying like, how do I like what is the story that I'm going to submit
that's
to?
not the way. No, you can't do that. No, don't ever, please, writers, don't do that. You can't do that. You, I, writers can't, you shouldn't be writing to please an editor. I mean, yes, of course, yeah, it'd be nice if we bought your work and published your work, but please, writers, do not do that because it's never going to work. And in fact, I mean, in a way, the nicest, well, I don't know, nice, but the most interesting thing people said to me when I was at Omni said, we have no idea what your taste is. It's
Hmm,
like, good, because that's why I'm open to different things. And it's the same with my anthologies. I mean, I've done different kinds of anthologies over the years.
yeah.
You know, different subjects. I've been mostly specializing in horror in the last, I don't know, 25, 30 years. And I forget what my point was. You know?
No, I mean, I get it.
But
Like it's,
yeah, I mean, I'm looking for really good stories that affect me. They can affect me in different ways. But they're not going to scare me.
yeah.
They're gonna,
Some,
I mean, I can mention a few stories that I've read over the years. People say, what are your favorite stories? And I'll say, well, the ones I reprint. Did the light just go off?
no, you're,
Sounds like you're
That's really weird.
scared.
Oh, no. Oh, no. Something's going on. Someone pulled the plug. It's like and now I really did lose my train of thought. That's
if
fine.
you, I'm not going to put you on the spot, but I'm going to get you close to
Oh, the
putting
stories
you
that
on
I
the
really
spot.
like. Oh, the
Yeah.
stories I really like, I reprint over and over again. I mean, there's A Sea Was Wet as Wet Can Be by Gay Wilson is one of my favorite short stories, and it's a favorite horror story. It's Alice in Wonderland done in it's the walnut, the Walrus and the Carpenter done as a contemporary story with people, kind of.
Mhm.
And it's wonderful and dreadful,
Yeah.
and I love it. But does it scare me? No, because it's not going to happen to me. Well, that's not fair. It could. I mean, anything could happen, but so I shouldn't say that. Knock on wood. But
Somewhere,
it's just,
someone out there is going to write that story, and maybe it doesn't exist yet. Maybe
I mean,
it's
one
just
that
waiting for
scares
you in the
me.
slush pile.
We'll
But there's
see.
like maybe there's that
I mean,
scary
in a way,
story.
there are scenes from movies that upset me much more than books
Yeah.
and stories.
Well, let's focus on fears then, because I'm really curious. Like you mentioned that all of the stories, there's 21 stories in here, and they range from what I think like mid 1960s to 2000, like 2022
Probably
ish.
20, probably 22. I
Yeah.
guess I don't remember the most recent. I
What
mean, yeah,
was
two of the stories are from the 60s. Most of them are in the last 10 years.
interesting? What was the criteria for you in kind of hunting and gathering these particular
Well, I
titles?
wanted more recent stories mostly. And for all my reprint anthologies for Tachyon, I try to get stories that are fairly recent, but have not been overly reprinted. I'm hoping that I don't want my readers to have read all the stories in the book. So hopefully there are things that have not been readily available or all over the place. If someone has their story reprinted in the collection, which is fine, a year's best, that's fine. But if they have had it reprinted like more than 3 times or 4 times in the last 3 years, I don't want to use it because I figure everyone's going to have read it already.
Mhm.
So that was part of it.
But
Yeah,
then
and
someone like,
also,
you go for it.
oh, with any anthology, it starts developing as you start bringing things in.
Mhm. So
Also,
what's that initial seed then? Is it a publisher
it
like Tachyon coming to you and saying,
we
we're
discussed
thinking
what
about?
the theme.
Yeah.
Jacob is the publisher and my editor. I mean, he wants a broad theme, and I'm happy with that. We have to find the broad enough theme. That's what I've done. I've done a movie horror one, Hauntings, which was ghost. It's more than ghost stories, more hauntings of things. He wants a broad thing and a broad topic, and I try to get a really good variety of stories within that broad topic. I mean, I've always tried to stretch any theme, whether I'm doing an original anthology or a reprint anthology, because it's more fun that way for the writers. It's more fun for me. And
Is it then like
if I can justify it to myself, then it's in. If I
yeah.
love the story, I don't care if it's like, well, people will say, "Oh, that's not on theme." It's like, yes, it is. I can explain
Yeah.
why.
So is it a mission then? Is it some sort of kind of like Easter egg hunt where you're like, I have this theme, I'm going to go out
Yes, I
into the
want
world and
wonderful
start digging up?
stories. Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, in a way. I mean, as I said, I start with a few stories that I know I want to use. I think actually the Joyce Carol Oates I had never read before. I mean, it's a classic. That one's probably been reprinted a lot. Where are you going? Where have you been? But I never read it, and I never saw the movie that was based on it. So that was kind of interesting. And that someone must have recommended, oh, you got to read this, and I did. It's like, but there were other stories that I knew about that I remembered reading over time. Endless Summer by Stuart Onan
Oh
is
my God. Oh my God.
he
That
called it,
movie.
it's funny because
Oof.
it's online someplace and he had a different title for it. And I'm thinking, why did you change? I'm sure I asked him, but he told me, but I don't remember why he changed the title. But it's called, I think it might have been because it was Summer of Something and it sounded too much like that movie, but it was called Endless Summer. And Dale's story, the Donner Party, I thought would be perfect for it. The Charles Birkin story, which to me is one of the really disturbing stories, is a classic, is one that I've read and I always wanted to reprint it because it was so horrible. And this was perfect for it. So, and there were a handful of stories. And I know Annie's I read recently, and I was looking at it. I think I don't think I took it for the year's best, but I read it for the year's best and really liked it. So I went after that one. And I guess I don't remember if I asked Hailey and Josh what you had. I mean, I can't remember if I went after specific stories, and actually maybe Josh, there was one, I don't know, did I turn that one down for was that recently in a year that I might have looked at for years best? I can't remember.
No.
It's an older one. All right. So I must
No, it's from 2022. I think you asked for that one specifically, I think.
Then I must have read it when it came out. So sometimes it happens.
So then for the authors, I'm totally curious, like you get the call, like Ellen's on the phone. And
who uses phones?
it's like, hello, it's Ellen Datlow. And she says, I want your story. And I mean, I would love for you all to kind of articulate the experience of the reach out.
I'm embarrassed to say the pay is really crappy and it hasn't changed for 40 years. So just be aware of that for reprint anthologies. But go on.
No, I'm curious. Like,
what
say,
oh my God, that's a ridiculous payment.
Oh, I mean, honestly,
I'm sure they think that.
money, like table that, because this is more about the glory of being an anthology with some amazing.
No, and also like I posted online. I almost knocked everything off my niece's desk. I posted online this for the YouTube people. This is like freaking bibliography of Ellen's. And like for me being like a prolific artist and a guy who like really is interested in prolific artists, it's just amazing, man. It's completely amazing. Like Ellen,
you know that a good chunk of those are year's bests.
Yeah. No, I know. But still, I mean, it's the work involved and whatever. And I mean, you could remove half that list and it's still prolific as hell. And it's like, I don't know, working with Ellen, it's like a fantasy. It's the kind of thing that prior to getting a book deal or having a story out, that, I would have imaginary interviews with editors. I would have, imaginary arguments with a manager. I would think about a phone call from like Ellen for a book like this. I would imagine the books on the shelf. So it's like, it's one of the, for me, it's like one of those moments where like the black and white fantasy that is colored in. And it's amazing. Like when Alan or Jonathan Mayberry, I mean, look, and if anybody asks me to be involved, I'm excited, but Alan is obviously something special. And I also, you feel like her notes are like super direct and awesome.
Well, that's not for the reprints though, but usually.
Not for reprints, but when you send her like a story, it's like very like flat, and you're like, okay, shit, all right, man, like, yeah.
Well, that's a whole different editing process.
No, but I love it. I love working.
No, but I try to be kinder to the people I haven't worked with before, but sometimes I forget. I mean, the people I work with a lot, like Jeff Ford, I'll just say, what the hell is this? No, I mean, I'm not usually that. I'm pretty blunt with the people I work with a lot. I'm sorry if I was too blunt with you, Josh. I should have been nice.
No. It's like Malerman, there's a lot of word echo here, No, I know, I love it. I'm what I'm describing is literally all love. And yeah, I'm sure you guys feel surprised. Bro, I don't know how you guys feel. You guys,
I mean, no, Josh, explain it.
Okay, Hailey's very now.
I mean, Ellen just mentioned that like she had to seek out, like she sought your story, like she was aware of it, like she like hunted it down, and like I it's such a like did you know that? Was that something that you were aware of? Like
well, she gave that story an honorable mention in the best of the year. So
it was on my short list.
Yeah, it was like so I knew she liked it, and I was super flattered. And I'm an Ellen fan. Like I read the best of the year every year, and I've gone back to the first one, and so like it's dream come true. I mean, just thrilling.
And Hailey, I know that you've also kind of worked editorially with Ellen, like that she's kind of, has she nuanced, like worked, like gotten into your stories, like original stories? Or has it always been?
my first one that Ellen's
Yeah, I don't
published.
think
Yeah.
he's the
Really?
first
Yeah.
Welcome.
And when I publish an original, I will be kind in my edits initially.
It's okay. I've worked with like dozens and dozens of editors, so I'm used to all kinds of approaches.
Mhm.
And Dale, I've
I
edited you. Dale, I've
Dale,
edited you.
please share your story just for the sake of
Well,
like history.
I have two Ellen stories actually. The first time I met Ellen, it was at the World Science Fiction Convention. It was a long time ago. It was like 2003, Ellen. You were editing what? Sci fiction?
Probably.
Would that have been right?
Yeah, I think so.
And I wanted to pitch you a story. Like there's nothing more annoying than a strange nobody trying to pitch you a story. And you said, "Is it fantasy?" And I said, "Yes." And you said, "I don't want any fantasy." And
Maybe it wasn't fantasy at the time.
you were looking for science fiction, but I had nowhere else to send it, so I sent it to you anyway, and you bought it. So that was a
That's a
gratifying
happy ending
moment.
story.
That was my first Ellen encounter. Ellen's you are a blunt editor, but I like that.
I do too.
And you know Ellen rejected my story. That's the story that I was telling, that the Donner Party Ellen rejected when I submitted it to her as an original. And
How long is it? How many words is it?
I don't remember, but you didn't like the story. The story was
not that I
broken.
didn't like it. I think it just it didn't feel right for for Tor.com. I can't say Reactor for that, but it didn't feel right. It was Tor.com. I mean,
it was Tor.com. Yeah,
now it's called Reactor, is what I'm saying. But I think I just didn't feel it was right for that venue, and that happens.
It wasn't ready. I mean, it wasn't ready. It needed.
What did I tell you to
another...
do? I can't remember.
You told me it was too slow, and I didn't know how to fix it. And so I messed around with it.
Why didn't you send it back to me? See, I hate that. You know, when you tell someone something's too slow, you know, you didn't think
at no point in your blunt editorial response did you say, however, if you figure out how to fix it, send it back to me.
Yeah, be careful, Ellen. I don't know if you want that on public, out there. That
let me just jump in real fast because we're talking about your story. I loved your story. I read everyone's story, and yours was, I mean, they're all amazing. I'm like a huge fan of I guess Anne Rice and even Proust. I mean, it has like the drawing room, tension and falling in and out of society, and the language. It was so good. And I ordered another one of your, like a novel of yours last night, and I grabbed my fiance Alice. I'm like, we got to do. She's gonna do the audio, and I'm gonna do the physical. It's something wood or in a wood or something like that. In the Nightwood, yeah. Yeah, I got it. So I got that one last night. I really loved your story. I just wanted you to know. So thank you. That's very flattering.
Well, since
I'm glad that Ellen likes it now too. Yeah.
While we're talking about the Donner Party, then let's kind of dive in, get a little granular with these pieces. And Dale, I'm really curious because there's this, when you read, maybe I'm going to ask up front for you to kind of do the most succinct kind of presentation. What's the kind of like, what is the story, or what you would want to kind of share with the listener? Because what there's a certain kind of cognitive dissonance when I come into the story where, the title is such a, like you say, the Donner Party, and it is such a kind of like bold kind of intro. And then we enter into the story itself, and we're kind of taking on a much different path. And so I guess, if you... But parallel, yes, but like that, like what is that initial kind of like schism that the reader has to kind of like, they basically have to kind of put their kind of preconceived notions down, but use the vocabulary of it, use the vernacular of it. And I feel like that's a conscious choice on your part.
It's an interesting, what happened is I teach at the college level, and a colleague was in an English department. A colleague had copied for his students a passage out of a life in the Victorian age, and it was The Dinner Party was the title of the passage, and he left a copy on the copying machine. And I looked down and I misread it as The Donner Party, and then I was like, oh shit, there it is, right? Because suddenly the Donner Party and the Victorian world collided in my head, and so I had this same kind of cognitive dissonance I think that the reader probably experiences, where they get to that opening sentence and they're like, wait, this is not what I was expecting. This is not the Donner Party,
Yeah.
if you will.
But
Well,
then,
like I also had like parallel. I don't mean to keep talking about I don't mean to interrupt you or whatever. I guess we're all just talking. But the freakiest moment in that story to me is when Lady Donner says to Mrs. Breen, like, who are you? That moment is like, oh man, it's like ice cold. That moment was like freakier to me than what's going on in the story, and that, yeah, man.
well, there's like a very kind of specific, I mean, like it's a story about manners, and it's a story about, kind of polite society, and kind of like entering into this world of class systems. But running parallel to it is this thread that runs red. And I don't think it's giving anything away, but I guess I am curious, like, if you can kind of speak to us about the kind of notion of what was it, the anthropophic crisis, that
Please
like
don't ask me to pronounce it.
I'll murder it. I'll take the bullet on that one. But like, in terms of the kind of current crisis that is being faced by this upper crust society, and the rituals that they've kind of created around it, it, where did that come from, I guess, is my question.
The story was very much about class from the beginning, in my mind, and I think that opening sentence goes directly to that, and it just seemed like I was going to use the word lovely, but it's not really lovely at all, but a very relevant metaphor for what social climbing is really all about. Not that it's actually about cannibalism, but it's pretty fucking predatory, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it just seemed a way to thread those things together and say something about class, because it's sort of taking off on what Ellen had said earlier. I don't really think that hard about scaring readers. The story was always very much about class, and I wanted a horror story. But
Did you realize it was a horror story, or initially, or what, or did you discover it was as you wrote it?
I knew it was a horror story because the opening sentence came first, and it has cannibalism in the opening sentence. But I didn't know exactly how it was going to be a horror story. I didn't know the various relationships between the characters. Mrs. Breen is trying to ascend into society with a capital S during the London season, and I didn't know all that. That was discovery.
It's amazing when you kind of go on that journey, which actually it's interesting because that made me think of Josh's story. So I want to transition. I had this moment with a sunny disposition, Josh, where I felt as if my journey in reading this piece, I felt as if like I started under one pretense, but then the story itself either evolves, mutates, decays, like it becomes like the snare that you set within this story, it it almost felt like kind of like walking through a kind of stream of conscious, like dreamlike trap. And I felt like the kind of young child at the crux of the story. So my silly question to you is, what came first, the ending or the beginning? Like, what was your way into telling this story?
Rarely is it the ending, but yeah, no, I knew for sure that Grandma's an optimist, Grandpa's not. Grandma, so in other words, Grandma saw the world in a brighter way that Grandpa was fairly jealous of or envious of. And it just so happened to coincide that as Grandma's dying, Grandpa's having serious eye trouble to the point where they both fail. And so upon her deathbed, I'm just giving the story away. He removes Grandma's eyes and puts them into his own head. So instead of glass eyes, which the optimist and the other prepared Grandma had prepared for him before dying. And it's weird because it's like I don't set out to write about like optimism in a horror setting, but then I've done it like 30 times or something. And at some point I have to say to myself, like, dude, this is what you're into. Like, this is how you see something. I think that you don't really recognize your own themes or motifs. You have to have written enough to notice repetition in your work, right? And so with this one, I mean, it was just the most obvious thing ever, but the Dungeon Punchinello is like that. Ghoul in the Cape is like that. I mean, Tom, the optimist in Bird Box, when he dies, that's another spoiler. When he dies, it's like the optimism in the house dies. And I do find myself often writing about this terrible situation, and there's a character or a theme of like someone who's able to maintain, all right, we're gonna get through this. It reminds me of this Far Side cartoon of there's like a guy like whistling while he's moving, like pushing a wheelbarrow through hell, and the demons are like, we're just not getting through to this guy.
So has writing kind of made you discover that you are yourself an optimist?
Yeah, definitely. Between songwriting and, I mean, the High Strung have songs Inside the Optimist Mind, Standing at the Door of Self-Discovery, Maybe You're Coming Down with It, which is about maybe you're coming down with self-doubt and maybe you don't have to. That all sounds like I'm like the horror Tony Robbins, and I don't mean to be like that. I definitely don't mean to be, and I sincerely hope that none of it's coming off that way. But it's a fascinating subject to me because I mean, because everything is perception, right? And it's like, and the difference between, and this was the real moment for me, is when I realized the difference between the optimist and the guy who's naive, right? The guy who's naive doesn't know the score, but the optimist does. The optimist knows the score and decides to react or to move forward this way. So it's not like, I think when I was younger and before writing, I would have assumed the optimist was wearing rose-colored glasses or uninformed.
Yeah.
But no, that's the naive guy. That's the ignorant guy. But the optimist knows, and there's something super exciting about that to me.
Okay, so Benji, the young child at the kind of heart of of Sunny Disposition, he's sitting with Grandpa, and Grandpa is striving. This is my interpretation. Grandpa's like striving towards like an optimism. Like he doesn't have it in himself, so he is seeking it in whatever capacity he can, and he finds it in Grandma. And he takes her optimism and sees the world through her eyes. But we as the reader are seeing all of this through ultimately through Benji's eyes, I would imagine. And that's where the horror comes in. It's not so much that the story itself is optimistic as there's this one character who is like, I am seeking optimism. And this is the way that I feel like I found it. And how do you feel about that, little Benji? And what is the toll of this poor, like, what is the toll of someone else's optimism? Benji is left with the trauma of optimism.
If there's any way to make a cynic of Benji, it's to explain to him how you're trying to find optimism. I'd pluck your eyes out and put them in my head. But I mean, I guess I would hope that there's like I mean, not that it's the saddest story you're saying, but I would hope that there's some, like, you're looking at Grandpa like, this is the guy, he just doesn't, he's just not wired that way. He's not wired. From the word go, when Meryl and him meet, when she pulls up and she's like, hey, do you need help with your car? He's like, I know what I'm doing. And she drives away and she comes back and she's like, yeah, but you still like to talk, right? So even from the word go, she's like, no, we can make something of this. And he's like, nah, you know, he's just not wired that way. And there's something sad about that to me. But then I have great friends who are not wired this way, who are cynical, way more cynical than I am, or I don't know if I have a great friend who's necessarily pessimistic, but definitely suspicious. And to me, how about this, the character that longs for that desires for the perspective of the optimist, but can't even pull it and see it for a moment. That's sad to me, and there's something like horrific, like inherently horrific in that to me, or something.
Yeah. And then we're just left, you know, how was your visit with Grandpa, Benji?
Yeah.
You know,
Well, I like that. I like that Grandpa just decides to show him, or to tell him that night, you know, that or that day. That I like that about it.
Hailey, I feel like you have stolen a word from the lexicon that, like, if I ever hear the word unkindly ever again, I feel like you've claimed it. Like, it is now officially yours. And, you know, if someone, you know, it's a very particular word. It's a very special word. And, you know, I doubt that it will be any day soon that I'll hear it kind of on the street. But when I do, there's going to be this kind of knee, like this gut reaction of just like shoulders scrunching and just being like, oh dear, there it is. And I'm being so hyper focused on unkindly here, but I
It's
really
an
do.
important word in the story.
Yes, yes. And I just want to ask, when did the word come about to you? Was it before, like, was that the seed, or did the story kind of build around it? And what came first, chicken and egg?
I think the story started to build first. I was just trying to figure out what the father, who's very particular about how he speaks, how he presents himself, would want to call women he disapproved of or girls he disapproved of when he wouldn't use more derogatory language, because he's very, presents himself as very friendly, very, very pleasant himself. So he's not going to call them like, something nasty. He's just going to say they're unkindly. So that, I think, is where the word came from. The characters were already starting to do their dance in my head before that word was selected. But I think the impact of it was really just on Morgan, because it's not really specified exactly by him to her what makes a girl unkindly. It's there she gets little bits when she does something or looks at something or whatever, or he sees something, which is the big deal, and is like, oh, that's unkindly. It's kind of like she's got some of the puzzle pieces of how he sees things, but not quite all of it. We're coming into the story after she has a pretty good idea of what's going on for the first time in her life. They've been taking these vacations and she's been completely oblivious. Her mom's not in the picture anymore. And only on this vacation, sometime between the last vacation and this one, has the picture kind of started to form for her. And she's not handling it well. And then she meets some girls at the beach that her father would think of as unkindly.
So when the story starts, her kind of doubt of family is kind of that's the foundation. That's the kind of aperture
Right.
in. I don't want to give too much away about the story itself, but what I really loved about the end is that you kind of take us on this journey that the reader has to kind of either you know, there's that kind of moment where we hit a kind of fork in the road, and it's like, do we believe what is happening is really happening versus like, you know, what is Morgan seen? And I guess, you know, maybe I'm thinking in terms of the kind of the general theme of the anthology itself, which came
Right.
after the story. But for you, you know, a lot of your work kind of like walks this line of, you know, go left and we're entering into this world, or go right and we enter into that. And, you know, whether it's in the mind or in the body or beyond, I don't know. Like, I guess my question is, when you started navigating or charting the course of this story, were we always heading in this direction? Was there kind of like an undertow to it that kind of literally kind of pulled us into the sea?
Um, this was, I remember, this was like 4.5 years ago when I wrote this story. So some of that is a little muddled in my memory, especially considering how tumultuous things became immediately out. Like I wrote it in February 2020, and then
What happened in
everything
February
has
20?
happened since then.
Again?
So little of that's muddled in my head. But I remember getting to a point kind of struggling a little bit because I wasn't certain where I was going to go, and there were points where I was considering more fantastical directions. Like I think there was one point where I was like, should they turn out to be, I don't know, man-eating mermaids or something? But then and because this other avenue occurred to me, it was much bleaker and darker than what I had anticipated for it, and I was like, should I explore this? And then, so I did. But yeah, it's funny because I typically don't write stories that don't have a speculative element. So when I heard from Ellen about this anthology, I was just like, well, there's really only the one option. I did give her 3, but I was like, these other two are kind of pushing it. As far as like, yeah, you could doubt, but this is the only one I felt that was like, this is really the only one that's like, yeah, this is what's happening here. And it's just her and these girls and her father and the beach and the ocean.
So in writing it, you're going along for the ride as well. Like whatever journey these characters, like the kind of discovery, you're still navigating and making these kind of discoveries as you go along.
I mean, that's usually how it is. I say I'm a plotter, but honestly, I'm not a pantser. I know that because I plan too much, I outline too much, but the outline changes as I go because I get dissatisfied, or a lot of the times I just get bored. But with this one, I did like figure that out, and then I went back and there was a lot of revisions and such. But but when I went back, I was like, oh, this was always there. Like the direction it went in. Like I knew what was up with her father. I knew it was up with her. It was just where it was going to actually end up, where they were going to land in the end. Just kind of that I had to discover. Yeah. And I had to kind of make certain choices at points, because there's a point when she is, you know, face to face with her father near the end, that I was like, do I want to do this? This is a lot for me. Yeah. But I felt it was the only thing that made sense.
Yeah. Okay, well, guys, the biggest mystery of all tonight is Annie. What the hell is that pelt?
I knew the
What is it? Which is the most annoying question. Everybody who reads that, like the next thing they say is, hey, what's the pelt? What's the animal? What is it?
I don't know. I don't know.
Now,
I know.
Is that the canned answer, or do you know and you're just not saying?
No, I intentionally made it so that I couldn't know, because I didn't want the reader to know either. So I don't have an answer. I really don't.
Cool.
A far more analytical eye would know this already, so I'm going to ask the question. But like, does the pelt itself change throughout the kind of description of it? Like, was it like, oh, here it could be a cow, but over here, maybe go more goat like are you in the descriptions of it kind of shifting your kind of understanding of what it is so that we're
Uh,
totally thrown off balance?
yeah, that's a cool question. No, I didn't intentionally shift it in a way that any of the things would be contradictory to anything else I had already set up.
Yeah.
But I did try to pull different facets of like what it was forward at different times. So
Yeah.
hopefully it doesn't ever actually like morph, like, but yeah.
Yeah. Because ultimately it just does, that's not the point.
Right.
It what it is versus what she sees it as, what our protagonist kind of like envisions, and how it's kind of influencing or kind of permeating the household.
Right.
In your mind, was the pelt just, was that the aperture? Was that your way in, or was the relationship between this husband and wife the kind of primary?
No, yeah, I thought of the pelt first. That initial image of it draped over the fence and being kind of far enough away that she could just see like the general shape and she thought it was an animal. That was the first idea for the story that drew me in. And I didn't write it right away. I usually don't. I sort of put it in the idea bank, and then that combined with a few other like um you know more conceptual, like the deeper things I was exploring, about like the deeper meaning in the story, things about the limitations of language and like how well can we ever really know other people and ourselves, and like those kinds of ideas. I kind of let that marinate with the
Mhm.
pelt image that I had.
Is there, would there be alternate universes where, had you written this story a month earlier or a day later, like there would be just a completely different kind of character dynamic, or like a different
Sure.
scenario?
Yeah,
Really?
yeah,
Wow.
I'm sure there could have been. And I wrote my way to that ending as well. That was not one that I had plotted out. It was one where I took the concept and I knew which themes I wanted to explore. And I knew like the setting and some stuff like that. And I just wrote my way through that one. Yeah.
So what did the pelt provide you then? It's a catalyst. It
Hmm.
is this kind of cloud in the sky. For me, like it's such a great disruptor.
Oh
But
yeah.
It's a
I
good word.
just,
Yeah.
like, for you, like, as the writer, as the author of this piece, like, what did it give
Yeah.
you?
Um, it gave me I guess it kind of gave me the launch pad, really,
Mhm.
I do think like that was such a smart question. I do think that if I had written it at a different time, it could have ended up being a totally different story. I definitely was writing, on instinct. That was like a not an uncensored draft, and the final draft is very close to the original draft for that one because I really was just like going with it.
Mhm.
But I I do follow that instinct of like what's most interesting to me. So it's totally possible. It's been a long time. It's an older story for me. But it's totally possible that I might have explored, identifying what it was, or a creature story, or some other turn. But then when I had the idea for how I do end it, I was like, oh, that's just way more interesting. So I just went with it.
Yeah. Um, yeah, it's so amazing to kind of hear about the kind of the marination process, the like how long it stays in you before
Mhm.
finally making its way out of you. Because cook
Yeah.
it for too long, it's going to be, it's going to have a different texture to it. But
Yeah, it's
when
gonna be
it's
mushy.
just right.
Yeah.
um, were you resistant to kind of release it at that point, or was it where you were like, I'm ready?
No, I was ready. Yeah, for a lot of times for me, I'll have an original, like the original seed will come to me and I'll kind of like wait, and it mixes with something else down the road. And I remember for the pelt, I think I had just read one of Ellen's Best of the Years, and I always feel inspired after those because it is just so many talented people, and you can just look at what they're doing and be like, which ones, what did I like about which ones, And I had read one, and I remember being struck by several of them in whichever volume that was, that they did so much with setting and locale. And I remember thinking, like, I don't know if I know any locale as well as these particular stories seemed like they knew. And then I was like, well, I do. I mean, I live in Texas. That's a Texas story. And that country setting in Texas is one that some like childhood friends, like I kind of set it mentally in their, their childhood home on land, much like that. And once I had that setting combined with that original pelt image, that was when I was like, okay, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to have it there. And I ran with that. Yeah.
So fascinating.
Will you find out what volume that was? I don't know, Ellen, probably, maybe Ellen, or whatever. I would love to know what volume that
I'm
is.
fascinated
Which
too.
one it was. Yeah. I don't know how I could flip back through them and see if I can remember, but yeah, I certainly don't know off the top of my head.
Really
Well,
is
didn't the
something
story
of-
come out in 22, your story?
It did, but it was years before it got picked up.
Oh,
Yeah.
really? Oh,
Mm-hmm.
oh,
Yep.
Jack is coming here. Sorry, Jack the Jerk is making his appearance.
But Annie, there really is something like particularly inspiring about an anthology, because it's almost like walking through a museum, right? And there's
Yeah.
like an impression of this work, and I don't want to say they're brief enough, but they are. You spent like a moment here, and you're like, it really gets the wheels turning to like write your own stories whenever you
Yeah.
read anthology. Yeah.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
I mean, I never thought of it that way. I think that's really, I like that a lot, that people are inspired by other stories that they
Oh
read,
yeah.
especially.
yeah.
Definitely. It's the best of the year anthologies. Somebody else said this. I wish I could remember who, but it's keeping your finger to the pulse of what's going on in horror, and each of at least as far as I feel from them, each of them is so rich in atmosphere throughout the different stories that is really that's what I find inspiring, because it puts me in a different mood, a different place.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something like, yeah, I don't know. Maybe I can't describe it at the moment, but it's just, it's that is what transports you. More sometimes more than what's actually happening in the story, the characters,
Totally.
is that feeling around you. And I know, Ellen, you don't get scared by them. I get scared by them.
That's so
And the thing is, I feel like I wouldn't be a horror writer if I didn't get as scared as much as I do.
Same.
So that's where, yeah, that
Well, I have
makes
a
me
question.
scared, and then I go.
Okay, I have a question. Now you're saying, that's interesting what you said about that specific anthology, Annie. So there were certain stories. Do you guys who do read My Best of the Year, do you feel that a lot of the stories have a sense of place? I mean, I don't know. I don't analyze what I do, you know what I mean? But you are getting something out of certain anthologies that it never occurred to me. And I wonder if that's the kind of story I like. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I wonder if it has anything to do with.
Yeah, I don't know that I would say that that's like a larger scale trend across all of them, but anytime you read an anthology with mixed authors, or even a collection from a single author, sometimes you get these interesting sort of resonances where one story randomly echoes something from another story, or certain things start to jump out at you in a weird way that you wouldn't pick up on if you had read each story somewhere else at a different time. And so I think that for that particular year, it just happened to be that a few of my favorite stories that you'd put in there were ones that utilized setting really heavily in a way that I had not been like thinking of at that time in my own writing. And so I was like, I want to try that. Like, so they just sort of gave me, it was the ones that worked the best for me in that particular volume. Yeah.
Well,
Ellen, as someone who has to.
This is interesting because, like Alan, your question is even interesting because it sort of like suggests like the anthology that Alan does, or the best of whatever, is that Alan's in a way, or in a certain taste, is at the foreground at that moment, or in a mood or whatever it is. It's not like Alan's the same exact person she's been for this entire time and everything she does, right? So that's like cool too, to see like what turns her on and what thrills her over time, like through these anthologies.
Well, I was able to, I mean, excuse me, I just wanted to say that I was thinking that When I did the best of the best was when it was like the first 10 years of the best horror that, and so I had to go through all the first 10 anthologies, and I realized how different some of them are. I mean, the first one, I mean, I still love the stories, but the stories are very different from the ones like 5 years later.
Mhm.
I mean,
That's what
I'm
I'm
not,
curious
I
about, like
don't,
that
I don't
idea of
know.
like things evolve, things like
Mhm.
Yeah.
a certain kind
Well,
of year
that
brings,
the year brings different things, and my taste evolves
Yeah.
too, I think,
yeah.
probably. So there's a whole bunch of factors.
Well, yeah, and that's like editor as artist also. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Well, just to go off of Josh's metaphor, that idea of like, if you are the curator of a museum, there's a certain, you have to kind of like, what is the experience of kind of walking through the gallery? Like, what's the flow from kind of one space to the next? And who's walking in behind Josh Malerman? This is always, these are questions we always ask ourselves.
Well,
Guys, I
Christopher,
am being very mindful of time. I don't want Josh to call rutabaga on me, but I do want to ask one last question. It is this idea of like Ellen having an opportunity to kind of hear the authors talk about the work, the ideas, and the kind of like the course that they went on in writing these particular pieces. Does it change the way that you think about them, or you're just like, yeah, that sounds right.
no,
That's
but I
good.
want to reread them all,
Yeah.
and I don't have time. I mean, I'm going to make time, but I have to read for this year. But no, it makes me, it's fascinating. It's fascinating.
Yeah.
I think it's great.
I
I
mean,
mean, I like that.
do stories change for you? Like you've mentioned, having to reread for the best of the best, like that idea of like what a story is the first time you read it versus the second time, or
Well,
if you'd be so
reading for the
fortunate for the
best of the
third.
year, some stories end up rereading like 4 or 5 times because by the end, it's a question of elimination,
Mhm.
So I have, usually by the end of the year, my reading year, I have like 250,000 words. I mean, if I count up everything I put as asterisk by, and I count up all the wordage for all of those, so I have to eliminate and get down to like 125, 130,000, maybe 140 the most.
Mhm.
So some of those stories I reread multiple times. A few of them I get more out of. There's a story in here called England and Nowhere, I think it's called. And it's a really weird, subtle story. And every time, I mean, it took me it took me at least 3 times to figure out one thing that was going on that it's in there that is not obvious unless you kind of figure it out,
Mhm.
And then, I mean, it's a very weird story. And some people, I mean, if you read it first, it seems very flat. It's like, what's this about? Nothing happens. But the more I read it and the more I've read it over time, over the years, it came out like 10 years ago, maybe, or 8 years ago, the more I get out of it. But most stories aren't like that. I mean, that's just this weird one that does it.
God,
But I enjoy if I didn't enjoy rereading them, I couldn't publish them in a
what a,
reprint anthology.
what a gift. What an idea. Like that idea of like rereading something 5 times and that every
Yeah.
time
Only stories. I
it,
mean, I never have time to reread novels anymore. I used to, but not anymore.
but that you can return to something and it changes. It's like you see a different inflection or a different color to
Sometimes.
it. Like
But
that's
I also know that if I reread something, if I can stand to reread a story that many times, and there's something about it that really has gotten to me, and I must take it for something at least, So it's
I've
also,
read your story once. That's enough. I'm gonna end there. Like, thank you for that one time. Two
Alan,
times.
and a little side note for me is that I whenever I go to used bookstores, I look in the Joyce Carol Oates section trying to find like a badass anthology with that story in it. That story is one of the greatest stories ever.
yeah, it is.
And oh my
It's
God,
online,
it's so good.
which
Right.
is
So
how I
then
copied
I'll
it.
find it. I'm like, and I'm always like, oh, I don't really like, this like cover, or like I don't even know what is this and blah blah
Yeah.
blah. But so when I discovered that, oh, the way I brought that story into my office is that I'm in a book with this story. Yeah, so thanks for that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was a pain in the ass to get. I mean, I had to go through these
I'm sure.
people.
Oh, that's right. That was the last one that was
And I didn't know if I was going to get permission in time. I finally had to say the sub-rights person was agreeable, but I still had to go to the sub-rights portal for Harper, whatever it was. And finally I said, I need it to know if I'm getting permission to use this or not. I need it now. And finally, I guess he got on top of them. And a week later, I got the permission letter.
Yeah.
So
Worth
thank
it.
goodness. Okay.
Worth it.
Yeah.
Guys, I cannot thank you enough for spending the evening with me and to talk about fears.
Jack's
I
restless.
truly appreciate it.
Thank you for having
Everybody
us.
pick up a copy of Fears, Tales of Psychological Horror from Tachyon Books, edited by Ellen Datlow,
Thank you.
including stories The Pelts by Annie Neugebauer, A Sunny Disposition by Josh Malerman, The Donner Party by Dale Bailey, and Unkindly Girls by Hailey Piper. Everybody, this has been Fearmongers. Thank you very much for tuning in. If you're out there, author who may or may not exist yet, you're going to write the story that one day scares Ellen Datlow.
I'm doing it. I'm doing it.
We're all
I'm on it.
has been dropped.
Dibs.
Thank you all for participating, and thank you, Clay.
Thank you,
Thank
guys. Have a
you.
wonderful
Thank you
night.
so much.
Thanks for
Thank you.
having us.
Have a good
Good
night.
night.
Bye.
Spooky
Bye.
time.
Bye,
Ah!
Allison.